Morning, everyone. Happy Mondays, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's deputy political editor, Ben Glaze. Everybody.
Morning. Hello.
Now we're going to take you through the biggest stories of the day, and through it all, we want you to ask us your questions. This is a People's Paper review, so get into the comments, tell us whatever's burning a hole in your head or your wallet, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on an interview with GMB host Kate Garraway, which is a must-read for anyone who thinks COVID is a myth about the troubles that her husband, Derek Draper, is having while he's still in hospital a year on. And on page 2, there's something else that we all know is true. The high street's dying. Now, Labour here in this particular story has got some plans about how we can save it. So, Ben, what's their big idea?
Yeah, now this is trying to build on something that they first mooted a couple of weeks ago. Now there's a couple of big plans in it. One of them is to try and stop a government plan whereby empty shops on the high street that have been disused for several months can easily be turned into cheap flats or homes. Now the government wants to do this because there's obviously a housing crisis. Not enough people can afford to buy homes, particularly first-time buyers. Government thinks, well, we've got empty buildings here, and we've got people who need homes here. Why don't we just let property developers convert them quite easily, and then people can move in? Now, there's two problems that Labour have identified with that. One is a lot of the accommodation, because it's not purpose-built housing, it won't be ideal. So, we know, this is, to a certain extent, this has already happened in some places under permitted development rights, called permitted development rights. But they end up with box rooms, lots of rooms without windows, and obviously no gardens, so it's not great housing. And then, of course, there's a longer term thing of you're transforming the high street by stealth by doing that. So it's not full of coffee shops, it's not full of shops, particularly like the independent shops that we all love. It becomes full of cheap housing. So Labour's saying it wants to stop that. I mean, realistically, it's not going to be able to stop that because government's got an 80-seat majority, and this is already going through. The second part, and Labour needs to be a bit more detailed about this, it's calling for a level playing field between online retailers, so Amazon, eBay, etc., and local high street shops. Now, the problem is, local high street shops have to pay business rates. So, there's certain things that concessions the government are doing at the moment because of the coronavirus pandemic. But Amazon's always had it quite good because they don't have physical shops. Where they've got their warehouses, their fulfillment centres, as they like to call them, the business rates are less because they're on the outskirts of town, close to motorways, not in the town centres. Labour's saying there should be level playing fields on things like taxation. What he's not doing is saying how much he wants to tax them. Now, this is the beauty of opposition. You can have ideas, but you do at some point need to put a bit of meat on the bone there. You do need some specifics. And Labour is not doing that, and isn't doing that on a whole host of issues, not just on the high street. But at least they're talking about it. And it is something, as we move out of lockdown, people, when they do return to town and city centres, are going to notice that a lot of shops are boarded up. I was on a job last week, and we were walking around the high street, and it's the first time really I've been in a high street for quite a long time, and I was surprised by the number of empty shops.
Yeah, and if I got some sympathy almost with the Tory position here, which is that if the business model of the high street is failing, and that's due to online sales, it's due to a change in our lifestyles, it's not just due to the pandemic, it's something that was happening anyway, it's happened faster because of the pandemic, it's going to carry on happening afterwards. Why should you, put a huge amount of effort in trying to reverse that tanker? Because you're not going to be able to. Doesn't it make more sense to try and find better uses for high streets, whether it's community hubs or event spaces? Decent social housing is in massively short supply. I appreciate you can't turn an old BHS store into 20 homes because there's only 2 toilets in it, for example. So you've got huge amounts of work to do. And like I say, there's rooms in there that wouldn't have windows and things. But that space, some of those buildings and some of those places could well become homes when we've got a housing crisis. I mean, what can you genuinely do? You can't just go and tax online jobs, say that will do, or tax Amazon, because then you've got every mum and pop kitchen table business selling stuff on eBay gets taxed and has to pay business rates on their kitchen table. It don't make any sense.
in the high street, you need a mix. So, you know, about 10 years ago when I was working in Cardiff, they had a big John Lewis store was being built. The whole redevelopment was a new shopping centre called St David's 2. And part of it was plush apartments in town. They were already moving to more people living in town and city centres to try and improve the mix. So you don't just have people living on the outskirts, coming into work to go for a pint, go for dinner, go to the theatre, cinema, whatever. You try and have a decent blend of people living and working in town and city centres. Like you say, this change, it's not coronavirus at all. Like, it's been accelerated. It's been worsened because so many businesses have gone out of business more quickly, and lots of them won't go back. But this was already happening. And yeah, where possible, I like to go to a shop and buy something. I actually hate shopping, right? It would be more convenient for me to sit at the laptop, click, 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 buy whatever I need, get it delivered 2 days later. Fine. But if you want stuff in a town and city centre, you have to go and use it or lose it, right? So you do every now and then. If you genuinely want them to be there, you don't just want them there to look at or for other people to go to. The onus is on you and me and everyone else watching, that if we want those shops in the high street, we have to use them. That sometimes means paying higher prices. And for some people, that's not possible, particularly, you know, when people are losing their jobs, people are on furlough. Of course, you're going to take the cheaper option. But if you want shops in the high street, you have to use them. It's not, there's no divine right that they should be there. It is the responsibility of all of us. And this goes for your local pub as well. Instead of getting like a £6-7 bottle of wine from the supermarket, if you want your local pub to be open, well, then you have to go and pay £4.50 for a pint and another £4 or £5 for a G&T. If you still want it there, when you do really want to go, you know, it's a responsibility on all of us. And the Mirror's got 2 good campaigns on this, both the High Street Fight Back campaign and one on supporting our local pubs. Those are the things that we have to do, that we can do. All right, not at the moment because we're all shut inside
just now. Yeah.
But when we are allowed out, go and use these facilities. If you can afford to, go and use your local pub, go and use your local shop.
Yeah, that Earl says that's the problem, holding up failing business. If you don't want to change, die. The internet and technology is here to stay, and don't fear anybody's got any money. But I think what we might see is, like you say, Ben, there's a change in the high street. There are some shops you have to physically go to in order to touch or look at something. I need a new pair of brown leather knee-high boots, right? I've had a pair for like 10 years. It's falling apart. But it's the kind of thing I can't buy on the internet because you need to see how it feels on your foot if you're going to wear it for 10 years. So, and when you're buying shoes for my daughter and things like this, there are some things I always get online because they're easy to get online. If I want to buy paper and pens and envelopes and goodness knows what, get it online because you know what you're getting. But if you want to just go and pick something up and look at and check it and try it on, or go to a garden centre or something and make sure you get the strip of plants that's in the best nick out of the ones they've got on offer. You've got to actually be there. You've got to say something. So perhaps in the future, the high street will be, fewer of those low profit margin, bog standard, you can get this stuff anywhere kind of shops, and more really specialised independent shops of the kind of product that you have to go to. You have to go and get it there because there isn't anywhere else you can really legitimately buy the thing that you want and make sure that it's good quality. So perhaps, but that's half a century of change, and people have got to have money to go and spend in the shops, as Elle said, which of course we don't have because we've been through a pandemic. But anyway, let's try.
A high street evolves, right? And Labour, in certain things, Labour are opposing for the sake of opposition. It does feel a little bit like this might be one of those instances.
Yeah, because I can see Labour suggesting some of these things. I can see Labour have said, sorry, Ben, I can see that they would say, let's go and turn city centres into social housing.
It needs a better plan rather than just, no, this is a rubbish idea. If you're not going to be constructive, I mean, obviously we're 16 months into what it theoretically is a 4.5-year parliament. So they want to say, well, we don't want to show our hand too early, but if you don't come up with a positive policy, it can be seen as just being too negative and like, oh no, we don't like that, that's rubbish. You do need to say what you want to do instead.
Yeah, and you can't just win the general election in the 6-week campaign when you finally produce your maths. You've got to win it sometime in advance. Keir, if you're watching. Anyway, keep asking us your questions. We're going to talk about holidays now and coronavirus and the vaccine and everything else. So there are growing, on the page 6-7 spread here in the Mirror, there are growing rumblings about a third wave of coronavirus that's spreading across Europe, and that it might put a stop to foreign travel this summer. Now, as often said on this show, booking a foreign holiday is an absolute hiding to nothing. Some people have no option but to go, and others just fancy it. Christy says it's simple, just holiday in the UK and support our own economy instead of other countries. But Ben, are we going to get this traffic light system, which they've been talking about last summer as well? I think we did have it. I can't remember. Are we going to get one of these? What's going to happen?
Well, first answer, too early to say, I'm afraid. Last summer, we did have travel corridors, which were countries that Britain had agreements that we could fly off on holiday and you wouldn't have to quarantine at that end or at this end. You could go without tests and you wouldn't be tested when you got back. That was when coronavirus was in retreat. It was a lot easier to do, and the rates of infection, which now seem fantastical when you think about what they have been over the past few weeks. Basically, if a country had 20 per 100,000, if it had fewer than 20 per 100,000, it was deemed a safe country you could go on holiday. Very broad this, it's not quite as simple as that, but roughly. If it was over 20 per 100,000, it was more likely to get added to, well, taken off the list of safe countries. So you wouldn't be able to go for it under travel corridors. Travel corridors were scrapped late last year when new restrictions came in. It's likely now that the government is trying to negotiate with countries over vaccine passports. Now, what does this mean? So if you're vaccinated from the UK, you would be a double vaccination. And of course, this should, by this point, will only be over 50s and those who are clinically extremely vulnerable, would be able to go on holiday, from our point of view, and not have to quarantine when they get to wherever they go. The problem then, of course, is what about the host countries? So if you're going on holiday to, for example, Spain, what does Spain want you to do when you get there? Spain's economy obviously relies heavily on tourism, so they might want you to come. So they might say you don't have to quarantine, you don't have to have tests. It's highly likely they'll say you don't have to have tests. But the government will say if you've been vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine when you come back to the UK. Problem is new variants. Now, we did very well creating our own variant, which turned out to be quite a good one. If that's your, scientifically, it's very bad, obviously, highly transmissible, led to more serious illness. The Kent variant, which is actually not, we all call it the Kent variant, actually means it's first identified in Kent. Doesn't mean that's actually where it originated.
Yeah, my people weren't actually responsible for it.
No, it's all your fault. South African variant is the one that people are very worried about because it could be vaccines might work less well against it. Now, if Britain's vaccination program going very, very well, if we all go on holiday abroad and then suddenly pick up a variant that doesn't work against our vaccines, that's bad because the people who are going on holiday will get more ill, potentially, and spread more virus. And then they come back and suddenly all the good work that we've all done, being stuck in our houses and literally millions and millions of people getting jabbed in their arm, that could all be undone. Now, nobody wants to see that. The government is this time being quite cautious. The earliest we'll be allowed to go on holiday is May the 17th. I suspect that won't happen. I think it's more likely that they'll try and hedge and go, not quite yet, look at the rates in Europe. And of course, the other problem with Europe is not just the rates of infection, but allied to that is the poor vaccination rate within 27 EU countries, which is obviously leading to this big, big diplomatic spat that's been rumbling along for a couple of weeks now between Brussels and the UK, and which could explode this week when there's a summit of EU leaders, a virtual summit on Thursday, where they will discuss blocking exports of vaccines and vaccine agents from a plant in Holland, which could cause problems for rolling out or the accelerated rollout of the vaccine program.
It could cause a massive lawsuit, I'd have thought, from about 57 different directions at once, which the EU would almost certainly lose on terms of the legal contract that they're being breached of. Now, Susie says, hello, Susie, nice to meet another one. A friend of mine's booked and paid for a holiday to Benidorm at the beginning of July. If there's a possibility she could bring back a variant of this virus that could be resistant to vaccines, should this not be prevented? Should the government not step in? Not just for others, but for her safety too. I think we've just answered the question, Susie, which is probably yes. But if she's a friend of yours, see if you can persuade her maybe. I'm sure he booked and paid for it. It's a bit difficult because travel insurance companies aren't paying out for things, especially if the government says you can in theory go to Benidorm. But Ben, the previous 2 waves of coronavirus in this country were both seeded by foreign travel. It was the February, it was people going to northern Italy for ski trips, bringing it back in, the first wave. And then everyone going off in the summer to these so-called safe countries down travel corridors. You don't go in a corridor to another country. You go, like on the picture here, you go through an airport, you go through a hub with millions of other people going through it at the same time. And they went to Spain in the summer, which was supposed to be safe, and they brought back again just in time for when we all went back to school. Perhaps the middle class who've got money to burn should just shut up and sit down.
The problem, like, people will say, well, the government said I was allowed to go. Why couldn't I go? And that's a totally fair thing to say, particularly when, they're the experts. They're the ones who should be deciding. And now, because of those 2 incidences that you've highlighted, both the foreign travel to like places like Greece and Spain over the summer, and then people going on skiing holidays, and particularly, as you say, in northern Italy, about 13 months ago, the government this time seems to have learned belatedly and is more likely to be cautious in allowing us to go abroad again, particularly because of our vaccination program. Now, if that is the case, then there'll be quite a few people like Susie, just on the questions then about her friend going to Benidorm, who might not be able to go to Benidorm. Ultimately, if it means you can't go abroad for one summer, but the following summer you can go on holiday, and we should all be vaccinated by then. I think that's a sacrifice worth making. Now, Susie is obviously able to decide for herself whether or not she wants to go. She's obviously decided whenever she booked this holiday to Benidorm, she was up for it. So, assuming she still is,
well, it's her friend, not Susie, but yeah.
Sorry, Susie's friend. If she still is up for it, and she's allowed to by the government, well, then that's a decision for Susie's mate to take. If the government decide, well, it's not up to you, we'll decide for you, well, fair enough. And then in terms of Susie's pal getting her money back, if the government has blocked you from going, then the travel insurance company either should pay out or the airline should refund. I don't know, obviously, what the circumstances of Susie's friend's planned holiday are, but there should be ways. If the government stops you from going, you should be able to get your money back.
Yeah, we'll rebook for a later date. Now, Andrew says vaccine passports are a discrimination. Not everyone can take the vaccine due to allergic reaction, compromised health conditions, etc. Surely a proof of negative COVID test is enough. If there are vaccine passports, Ben, one assumes that Andrew's complaint here is going to be null, because they would obviously not apply to someone who can't take the vaccine for medical reasons, and you would have an exemption certificate of some sort.
So vaccine passports, we refer quite lazily, unfortunately, and myself included, to vaccine passports. Some of the apps that are being developed would allow you to go on there and say, I've had the vaccine, I've had the 2 doses of the vaccine, so fully protected, and would also allow you to prove that you've had a negative test. So that should answer Andrew's point. Yes, there's obviously certain categories of people who can't have the vaccination for medical reasons. There'll be some refuseniks, who, like the anti-vaxxers, who say they won't have it because Bill Gates is trying to put a chip in their arm to find out where they are every moment of the day, because obviously he's got nothing better to do. And then there will be others who, like, obviously we're going down age groups at the moment. Younger people who traditionally be more likely to go on holiday won't be able to, because if it was a vaccination passport issue. So yeah, that is something the government is very aware of, something that they are trying to address in building up these plans. But I can't stress enough how far off this is in practical terms. Like, it's already 2 months away anyway, at the absolute earliest. And that's if the government said, oh yeah, May the 18th, off you go, get on the plane, head to Heathrow, head to Birmingham Airport, Manchester Airport, off you go to the Costas. I mean, I really don't think that is going to happen.
Vaccinating ourselves is not the answer to this. It's vaccinating everyone else on the planet. And there's, there might be 1 billion people vaccinated by the end of this year, but there's another 6 billion who still need it. Now, keep asking us your questions, everybody. Let us know if you're planning to go on holiday this year and where and how. Now, Eva says, kids can't have the vaccine, so how would families travel? This is kind of a point, isn't it? Because if you've been vaccinated twice, you're probably a gran or a granddad, say, you can go off and have your holiday, perhaps, if the government lets you. But if you wanted a holiday with your grandchildren that you haven't seen for a year, or if you're a family and you want to take your children with you, the children could arguably go abroad, pick up a foreign version of the bug, a new variant, and bring that in and spread it around the school, thereby infecting everyone in the country who hasn't had any vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously we can't vaccinate children at the moment, as Eva has pointed out. That's for very good reasons. Of one, the tests are only now starting to take place on whether it's safe for children. Thoughts are it would end up being safe for children, but obviously you don't want to start doing it unless it's proven that it is. Kids are less affected by it in terms of less affected by getting coronavirus in terms of serious illness. Like vanishingly small percentages get seriously ill, but obviously they can help spread it, as we've seen with kids going back to school a little bit. But we should emphasize as well that they are not large figures that kids are spreading it in schools. I know like lots of kids are having to do lateral flow tests, and that bubbles are getting sent home if one kid tests positive, which is obviously, again, right, cautious approach. But yes, it would make it more difficult for families to travel if the government said you have to have been vaccinated to travel. But of course, what kids can do is take the tests. If that was one of the things that government stipulations was negative tests before you can go abroad, kids would be able to have negative tests because they are obviously in school, and in order to go to school, getting very used to doing regular tests.
Well, older children, yeah, and
yeah,
the possibility. I keep asking your questions, everybody, about whether it's the high street or whether you want to go on holiday this year. You had quite a few people talking about staycations. And there's also this issue, isn't there? Lisa says, as soon as I can get out of here, I'm off. I don't know if she's talking about Facebook and the news agenda or just out of this country. But yeah, I can kind of see the urge to desperately try and get back to normal and go and have some light-hearted relief somewhere. But there's a lot of people who've got no money. A lot of people have lost their jobs, and there is still a pandemic raging. And there's the possibility, isn't there, Ben, that you could be told you're allowed to go somewhere and go off on holiday to wherever the government has given you a green light to go to. And while you're there, the traffic light changes from green to red. And when you come back, you have to isolate with your whole family in one hotel room for 2 weeks and spend another $2,000 doing it.
We saw this last summer when the rules, and everyone went knowing that the rules could change quickly. That is a gamble, that is a risk that as adults we decided to take. And most notably, of course, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. So he, along with the Department of Health, it's his ministry, Whitehall Ministry, that was actually deciding on the travel corridors. And he went for a family holiday in Spain. Within a couple of hours of him landing in Spain, Spain was put on the naughty step, added to the list of countries that if you came back, you'd have to quarantine because its infection rates got so high. And very quickly, he was on the first flight home to come and deal with it all. And he had to do everything from his house because he'd fallen victim to his own government's policies. Now, fair play to Grant Shapps. He actually dealt with it very well. He was like, yeah, well, I took the risk. This is what's happened, and this is what we have to do. And if a government ever wants to show it lives like its citizens, well, that was one of them. He ended up being shut away, having gone on a holiday to Spain, which I think something like 5 million Brits do in an average year. And he ended up, having to self-isolate for 10 days.
Yeah, perhaps the best idea. Then I think maybe some ministers, ostensibly, most so far the government ministers saying it's too early to book a holiday. Don't go booking holiday. Don't go booking holiday. But there's a few more saying we're going to be doing staycations this year and maybe for the next few years till this is safe.
It is worth people watching this deciding whether or not they should be booking that package holiday to Spain, Portugal, Greece. If you want to book it now, well, that's up to you. Obviously, personally, I wouldn't. I'd be too worried about whether the government will lift restrictions. And then, of course, as we've just been saying, even if they're lifted, they can reimpose restrictions at very, very short notice. It probably would be better. I can't remember who, but someone asked one of those questions saying, boost the British economy, do staycations, go on holiday. I mean, I think that is, if you want to get away, you are more likely to be able to go on holiday to a part of Britain than you are to be able to go on holiday abroad. And you would certainly face less uncertainty by going on holiday to Dorset, Cornwall, Devon, the Lake District, Scotland, West Wales, than you would if you booked to go abroad.
Exactly. And Debbie says, the point I was just about to make, actually, Debbie, great minds think alike. Many people won't be able to afford a staycation. Greedy owners are quadrupling the prices. They're also broke owners of holiday lets and so on who've had no money this year. And so they're trying to get some of their money back by increasing their prices this year. But the foreign holidays, of course, are going to be a bit cheaper because those countries are desperate for people to come in and they really need the cash. So I think people need to remember that when you're having your foreign holiday, looking at it, and it suddenly comes in much cheaper than your staycation, you need to budget for the extra $2,000 and 2 weeks in a hotel room when you come back, and include that in your price. And you will soon find probably that staycation is actually the cheaper option.
And the cost of the test that you might have to take.
And the hundreds of pounds for tests, especially
you have to pay those yourselves. And you know, Debbie was saying about people who own holiday lets putting up the prices or caravan park stays. Yeah, they probably are, but that's because there's rising demand for them. And you know, as we all know, if demand goes up, prices go up. If the supply remains the same, basic economics. But secondly, as you just pointed out, Susie, there's been months and months and months where these businesses, they are businesses, haven't been able to operate, in terms of they haven't been able to let out their little holiday cottages down on the south coast, you know, or anywhere else. So they do need to try and make up money that they have not been reaping over the past, well, best part of the past year, but certainly the past few months.
Exactly. Some of those are run by big businesses, and some of them are just run by the person who lives next door, who's got a buy-to-let mortgage and has had real problems paying that mortgage in the past year because no one's been staying in the holiday let, you know, in the annex or wherever. Now, Gerard says, why are travel agencies still letting people book holidays then? I tell you why, Gerard, because the whole travel industry, in fact, everything that's a luxury, and travel is a luxury, it is predicated upon us all trying to pretend that real life doesn't exist. Right, and so they charge a premium for us to pretend that everything is wonderful and we all live in sunny, wonderful times and we don't need to use cash because it's all been paid for in advance or on a credit card or something. And travel agencies have still got jobs to try and keep going. They've got hotels have got jobs they need to keep going. But I think it's a case of, as Ben has said, trying to be sensible and, you know, realizing that the pandemic is continuing. Just put yourself in the position of a 14th century peasant during the Black Death, right? Would you really be demanding a trip to Benidorm? No, because the Black Death's stalking the countryside. You would stay at home and feel safe doing it that way. But we do thank you, Ben, for that, anyway, explaining some of that to us. And thank you for your questions, everybody. Now, we do have some good news. There is some good stuff happening in the world that's not to do with holidays, but it will still make you happy. And here it is. I love that. I love that little bit of music. It's so ironic and sarcastic. Now, dog napping has been in the news a lot in the past year. It supposedly increased during the pandemic. But last night, now, 6 people were in custody on suspicion of conspiracy to steal after police seized 83 dogs on a traveller's site. Now, with some pedigree animals, you know, being worth 4 figures, this is big business for some people. And then police are now going through all these 83 dogs to see if they can find those that have been reported stolen, find their microchips. And the wonderful news here is that potentially 83 owners are going to be reunited with their beloved pets. Ben, can you imagine the wagging tails? These dogs are going to be expressing their absolute, the whole backside's going to be wagging. Oh, Mum, I'm so glad I see you. You won't believe what happened to me. It's going to be wonderful scenes. At least the police have got them, hopefully get some of them back home.
As soon as I saw the paper at 6 o'clock this morning and got to this story, I knew we'd be talking about this because I know what you're like with animals and particularly with dogs. Yes, it's good news. 83 dogs. I'm genuinely glad that these dogs are hopefully going to be reunited with their owners. Now, assuming the owners have been responsible and got them microchipped, then I would imagine the police will take them all down the vet, scan them like a barcode at Sainsbury's and say, oh, that belongs to Mrs. Miggins at number 33. And she'll get a little pooch back. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a serious point in so much as demand for dogs has gone up, not kept pace with supply. So instead of people just waiting, because everyone wanted a puppy apparently during lockdown, not me, has to be said. Got a nice house that I don't want a dog messing up. But
you wait.
Instead of people waiting until dogs became available, apparently people were even putting in orders with criminals to go and nick a dog from the park. And it must be terrifying if you're the owner. Some of whom have been robbed of their dogs rather than just like let them off the lead and then they never came back. So hopefully some good news today with police raiding this traveller site just outside Ipswich, that eventually these dogs will be reunited and that the families who lost them, and it must have been pretty devastating for, well, I suppose for the adults as well, but if his kids, come to love the dog and
well, you've got to explain to a child someone's stolen an animal that's basically their brother or sister, as far as the child's concerned. Now, Emma says it's lovely dogs that will go home, hopefully. Quite right. The other thing worth bearing in mind is that, well, there's a couple of things. A lot of people who wanted, the reason that some people have been dog napping is because they're used to having puppy farms sending in their puppies from the continent. And because of the pandemic, they haven't been able to do that. So therefore, they've started snatching dogs in this country in greater numbers than they were. So be very aware of where you are buying your pets from and make sure you see the place where the animal was bred, because that will tell you everything about how the animal is going to be in your house and what kind of upbringing they've had for the first few weeks of their lives. It matters. The other thing is that these animals, they're not usually stolen to sell, but they're stolen to breed. So if you've got an animal that's pedigree animal and it's worth a lot of money, they've not been stolen to sell them on because, if they're 4 or 5 years old, they can't do much with them. They're stolen to breed. So get them chipped, but also get them spayed. For goodness sake, get them neutered or spayed. They're less likely to steal them and more likely to dump them quickly if they find out they can't breed. So you'll get them back and you'll confound this particularly nasty, horrible crime, which is just upsets everybody for no good reason and means the dogs have terrible life as puppy factories, basically. So everybody get your dogs neutered and spayed as well as chipped, and then hopefully this won't happen. And hopefully whoever did steal these 83 dogs, hopefully they're all going to get returned to their owners, and whoever was involved in stealing them will be in clink, which would be nice. No more dog thefts. Right, thank you for joining me, Ben. Thank you for explaining everything about our holidays and traffic light system. I think we've all ended up with the position that we should probably not think too much about a foreign holiday anytime soon. And buy the Mirror, everyone, because it's really worth reading that interview with Kate Garraway about her husband, Derek, and the problems they've been having with COVID. It just proves that it's not a myth. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for the anti-vaxxers for derailing our comments on the Facebook thing. But get the vaccine, everyone. Don't listen to the idiots. And we'll see you on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. Bye.